This week on Vaticano, in a letter to Chilean abuse victims, Pope Francis recognizes mistakes that the Church has made in addressing cases of abuse. Also, the Vatican speaks out on the value of the combination of faith and sport. And travel with us to the Italian city of Bolsena to discover the origins of the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ. For this and more, Vaticano starts now. Pope Francis revived a tradition of Paul VI by moving the procession of Corpus Domini to the outskirts of Rome. For nearly 40 years, it had been carried out in the center of the Eternal City. The Holy Father chose Ostia, a large neighborhood, part of the city of Rome, located some 15 miles to the southwest. The district is considered the most populated area of Italy, and some experts consider this zone to be also one of the most dangerous due to a strong mafia presence. Pope Francis had already established a personal relationship with Ostia's inhabitants by making a surprise blessing of families at Easter of 2017 and visiting the parish of Santa Maria Regina Pacis in 2015. The Holy Father started the Eucharistic celebration this year in a square located in front of St. Monica's parish.
When you adore Jesus in the Eucharist, you receive the Holy Spirit from Him and you find peace and joy. Dear brothers and sisters, let us choose this food of life. Let us make Mass our priority. Let us rediscover Eucharistic adoration in our communities.
After the celebration, the Holy Father headed the procession by holding Christ in the Eucharist. The 1-mile-long procession ended near the parish of Our Lady of Bonaria. The tradition of the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ goes back to a medieval Eucharistic miracle in Bolsena. Learn about the origin of this particular solemnity later on in the show. The Holy Fathers recognize the mistakes that the Church has made in managing cases of sex abuse in the Church in Chile. In a letter to abuse victims in Chile, he wrote that with a feeling of shame, he recognized that the Church hadn't known how to listen, and furthermore, hadn't reacted quickly enough. The letter comes after a lengthy process lasting several months that has addressed the Chilean abuse crisis. After a meeting with the Pope from May the 15th to the 17th, the 34 bishops, who constitute all of Chile's active bishops, offered a written resignation to the Holy Father. In reply, the Pope decided to send Archbishop Charles Scicluna and Monsignor Jordi Bertomeu from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to the Diocese of Osorno in Chile for the second time to oversee an in-depth investigation in order to take the relevant measures and resolve the crisis. The Vatican's Department for Laity, Family, and Life issued a document about Christian perspective on sports. Paying attention to sports is not new to the Church. Recently, the Vatican hosted its own soccer World Cup, called the Clericus Cup, among the seminarians and clergy that study in Rome. Representatives of the Holy See also participated in the opening ceremony at the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympic Winter Games. Sports share common values with faith, such as commitment, sacrifice, and overcoming one's own limitations. And it's not just by chance that Pope Francis often refers to the biggest sporting events, such as the Olympic Games and last year's Super Bowl, in his messages. The new document is divided into 5 sections and is intended to offer a Christian perspective on sport. Father Patrick Kelly, Associate Professor of Theology at the University of Seattle, explains that dating back to the early 20th century, popes have spoken out a lot about sport. But this document is the first one that gathers all the ideas that the Church has expressed on the subject throughout these past years.
So I think this document is helpful as a reminder, about the importance of recognizing the dignity of every person, And that comes from God, who's created us in God's image and likeness. It doesn't come because we wear a certain colored jersey.
The document concludes with a pastoral proposal on sports, giving guidance to people involved in the pastoral ministry of sport, including families, coaches, managers, clergy, and religious. This week, the Holy Father welcomed the newly elected president of Bavaria, Marcus Soder, to the Apostolic Palace. Mr. Soder is known for taking the decision to bring back the tradition of displaying crosses at the entrances of public buildings in Bavaria. After the meeting with Pope Francis, the president of Bavaria paid a visit also to his fellow countryman, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. The Holy Father welcomed His Beatitude Ignatius Joseph III, Patriarch of the Syriac Catholic Church, whose headquarters are located in Beirut, Lebanon. His Beatitude is the spiritual leader for some 200,000 faithful spread around the world. The historical territory of the Syriac Catholic Patriarchate is the war-torn region of the Middle East in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. Bishops of the joint Burkina Faso-Niger Bishops' Conference met with the Holy Father at the end of their ad limina apostolorum visit. From Burkina Faso's population of around 13 million people, about 1.5 million are Catholics. On the contrary, in Niger, Catholics are an absolute minority, numbering around 25,000 people out of a population of almost 15 million. The predominant religion of these two countries is Sunni Islam. Pope Francis met with a delegation from the Russian Orthodox Patriarchate led by Metropolitan Hilarion Alfeyev, head of external church relations of the Patriarchate of Moscow. The meeting with the Pope marked the conclusion of the ecumenical conference between the Russian Orthodox delegation and the Italian Catholic Bishops' Conference. During the impromptu intervention, the Holy Father asserted that the Catholic Church will never permit an attitude of division between the two churches.
We will never allow that. I don't want it. In Russia, there is only one patriarchate, yours. We will not have another.
Through this statement, Pope Francis reduced almost to zero one of the main problems in the dialogue between Rome and Moscow, which is the question of the canonical territory of the churches. This is because the Russian Orthodox Church has suspiciously looked upon the Roman Catholic structures in Russia, often accusing them of proselytism. Speaking about the internal issues of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Holy Father assured,
the Catholic churches should not interfere either in the internal affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church or in political matters. This is my position and the position of the Holy See today, and those who meddle do not obey the Holy See.
Pope Francis said that the Church must study theological problems and discuss them, but at the same time never stop walking together in prayer, dialogue, and common projects. One of these common projects was inaugurated in Rome a few hours after the meeting with the Pope in the Lateran Palace. 100 years ago in Russia, there were events like those that took place in Rome 19 centuries ago. The persecution of Christians. A lot of bishops, lay people, and priests were tortured and martyred, only for the fact that they professed the faith of Christ. Before the revolution in 1914, there were about 70,000 representatives of the clergy in Russia. But by the end of 1937, only 100 remained alive and free. Imagine the scale of these persecutions. The priests, the bishops, and the laity were killed in the most brutal ways. Some of them were executed by impalement. Some were torn apart by horses. Some were crucified on the royal gates of the church's altars. Some were simply shot in test sites, in woods, and in prisons. Of course, most of the martyrs were Orthodox, but there were also people of other faiths. In particular, of course, there were amazing Russian Catholic martyrs.
русские католики.
There were few in Russia compared to the Orthodox, but of course this proportion makes them great martyrs. They also were amazing saints, and we've dedicated a separate stand that tells the story of these Russian Catholics.
Русским католикам, мученикам у нас посвящен здесь отдельный стенд и отдельный рассказ.
I would summarize it in one sentence, which was used by Pope Francis and is very evocative, also because he pronounced it in front of the Holy Sepulchre. The ecumenism of suffering and of blood. Our two churches have in common not only veneration for many martyrs of the past, a common veneration that started with Saint Stephen, the first martyr, but also for modern ones, starting from the martyrs of the Revolution onwards. Both churches have had a trail of blood bearing witness to their faith.
Per testimoniare la propria fede.
С одной стороны, мученики отдавали свою жизнь.
On one hand, the martyrs gave their lives, and it seemed that the mission had ended. Hundreds and thousands of churches and almost all of the monasteries in Russia were destroyed. But on the other hand, it was their victory. No one could break their spirit. No one, not even the huge totalitarian Soviet state.
Огромное тоталитарное советское государство в том, что сегодня.
In fact, today millions and millions of people have come back to their faith in the post-atheistic spaces in the former Soviet Union, primarily in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. It is to the tremendous merit of the new martyrs. It was they who kept the faith. It was they who showed how a disciple of Christ should be. It was they who showed with their lives how to fulfill the commandments of Christ. Thanks for watching. Get ready to take a look at Holy See diplomacy in action. Welcome back. You're watching Vaticano.
On the occasion of the International Day of Mother Earth, that was celebrated in April, this panel discussed Pope Francis' encyclical letter Laudato Si. The Holy See participated. This is the continuation of my previous report.
What the Pope is proposing is really something radical, an ecological conversion wherein man finds his true and just place in the relation to all that is around him and thus begins to behave in a manner that is coherent with the common good of all creation and of the Creator.
Your Excellency, an ecological conversion. Isn't this a little too late for that?
So I would say this conversion is always the same thing that I'm repeating, that without spiritual dimension, a human being cannot make a real human judgment. It must be always present. The tendencies that we speak about, immediate financial, economic consequences, very important thing, and I would say it makes us think in very objective terms, but it's not enough. And this is why Pope insists on a subject that was in the past less present, but today is more important.
Also in view of future generations?
I would say this exactly, somebody said, what we have is not what we inherited from the past, no? It's not what we received from our fathers. It's something that we are responsible to the future generation. So it means we should not look back, we should look only forward and see our well-being is good if our people who will come after us will be happy.
We must strengthen the necessary and urgent understanding between the different existing visions and especially learn from the good practices and traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as those of peasants and other people engaged in agriculture, ranching, grazing, fishing and forestry. So does this mean back to the 60s?
I would say we have to understand that if we have people, let's say, speaking in the name of the peasants of Latin America, and especially peasants who are living on sustainable, self-sustainable agriculture, yes, certainly they live, this means staying in touch with the earth is a part of their living. But many others we have lost this sensibility in many other places in the world. So I would say it's good that somebody reminds us of this. And it's good that we know that it's much more important, let's say, being related to the earth, to the food, to the fruits of the earth, than just going and shopping,
When you grow as a peasant, using with your own hands the land, the water, the seeds of Mother Earth, you develop a profound attachment for her. And this love for Mother Earth is basically the way we relate to the future generations. We want and we need a healthy Mother Earth because we put its fruits into our bodies.
So talking about the fruits of the earth here, because in the end, we put the fruits of the earth into our bodies, and I think this applies not only physically, the fruit of the earth, but also spiritually, the fruits of society, media, etc., they we put into our brains, minds, and so forth, right?
And we believe, and it's good to believe, I don't think it is against any teaching, that we believe that a right attitude brings you better results.
There's a saying, in a healthy body lives a healthy soul.
And even that, Ostia said, is even better. So we believe that exactly healthy body with healthy behavior produces also spiritual consequences. I would say at least more sensibility for the spiritual dimension of human life.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the interview.
Thank you.
Referring to Laudato Si, the panel presented the concept of harmony with nature, an opportunity for all of us to understand the interdependence between human beings and other living species on the planet that we all inhabit.
In a few moments, we'll be back with more on Vaticano. More on Vaticano begins now. Orvieto, one of the many quaint little country towns in Umbria, central Italy. At first glance, it doesn't seem to possess anything more than your typical Italian small town, except for the majestic beauty of its cathedral, perhaps, which has become over the years one of the symbols of the city. And yet there's a special ritual that draws together the people of this town every single year. It's a procession in honor of the body of Christ, called the Feast of Corpus Christi. Which begs the question, why is it that Orvieto, a relatively small town of about 20,000 people, displays such a mood of exaltation for this feast? Bishop Benedetto Tuzia, the Bishop of Orvieto, explains what drives the citizens of Orvieto to organize this big procession every year.
Why Orvieto? Why this beauty? Because this beauty conceals something else, more mysterious. It's all about an incident that commemorates another incident that happened a couple of miles from here, not very far. It's the alleged story of a German priest who was going through hard times and who started questioning the mystery of the Eucharist.
This doubting priest followed the counsel of his confessor and made a pilgrimage to Rome to the tombs of the apostles. Along his way to the eternal city, the priest kept reflecting on the mystery of the Eucharist, and on the last stop of his pilgrimage, at the small city of Bolsena, he celebrated a Mass that was to completely change his life.
And it was while he was celebrating Mass that he received all the answers to his doubts and uncertainties. Because while he was doing that, before breaking the sacramental bread to hand it around, blood spilled from it. It was as if the two pieces of bread had become live flesh, from which blood started to ooze. And this blood stained the corporal and the other fabrics and stones on the altar.
The priest was so impressed by what had occurred that he couldn't finish Mass, and awestruck hid the pieces of the body of Christ in the sacristy. Immediately afterwards, he went to see the local bishop to let him know of the occurrence. The Bishop of Bolsena then brought the corporal with the miracle to the city of Orvieto, because at that time Pope Urban IV resided there. An interesting fact is that St. Thomas Aquinas was also at Orvieto at the same time, and was probably one of the first people to admire the Eucharistic miracle. And so it was that in 1264, with the bull Transiturus de Hoc Mundo, Pope Urban IV established the feast in honor of the Most Blessed Sacrament for the whole Universal Church. While wandering around the little streets of Orvieto in search of more evidence of how the feast of Corpus Christi was born, we stumbled across a mysterious image that seems to tell its story. It's a 17th century tapestry by an unknown artist. On the left, there's Pope Urban IV. On the right, we can see Saint Bonaventure of Bagnoregio and Saint Thomas, the Dominican monk who was entrusted with the officium of the feast and who later composed one of its most famous hymns, Adore te devote. In between these two saints, though, these two doctors of the Church, right at the center of the image, there emerges in all its force the figure of a humble little girl, a pious girl named Juliana, who's considered the true architect of what to this very day the Church calls the Feast of Corpus Christi. Father Philippe Dallour told us the story of this simple girl, endowed with extraordinary spirituality and relationship with the Eucharist.
Saint Juliana of Mount Cornillon. Soon after her birth, her parents both died, and she became an orphan. She started having visions of the Eucharist. And from these visions, she felt a desire to promote a feast of the Eucharist. Later on, when she became a prioress, she felt the need to communicate her intentions, which in her opinion came right from heaven, to the Bishop of Liège and to various other important people of the area, among whom the Archdeacon Jacques from Troyes, who would later become Pope Urban IV.
Qui va devenir le pape Urbain IV.
It's indeed a very beautiful thing that Orvieto is the custodian of this mystery. But even more striking to me is the fact that this mystery goes through women, female figures. It's them who pushed and finally persuaded the Pope to use this moment and establish it as a celebration of the Eucharist, of the Corpus Christi.
Coming to this point, in order to fully appreciate what Michelet calls the wonderful poetry of God wrapped in a piece of bread, we can't but follow the only way ahead of us and let ourselves be led by that invisible hand that silently breaks through history, and which many people prefer to call providence.